Ay, ay, ay. Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. How are you? That's Shlomo Katz singing his Nigun Nevo from his Live in Melbourne album. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Who's tuning in with us as we're doing some beautiful learning on a Tuesday night? Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehuda in Florence, South Carolina, Melissa in Great Neck, New York, Tom in PA, Paula in Chicago, Bill in Missouri, Nancy in North Carolina, John in Maine, John in Sedona, James in Indianapolis, Lucy in Minnesota, Patrice in Utah, Donatella, Shalom from Rabat. What's Rabat? Help me out. Renee in Indiana, Christo in Lubbock, Paula here but sad. I will have to leave soon. Family situation in the great Northwest. Beautiful music. Paula, may the family situation resolve positively. Excuse me. Where'd I go? Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida. Hannah in New York. Debbie in Tennessee. Terry in Minnesota. Over there on the YouTube side. Lynn in North Texas. Seraphim in, where was it? In Sacramento, right? Seraphim in Sacramento. We'll blow the shofar in just a moment. But first, today's episode of AT Daily is dedicated by Maria Cruz. Her dedication is, "This is a thank you for the windows you provide that have allowed a not Jewish me to enjoy so much of your history and wisdom." Thank you so much for your beautiful dedication, for sponsoring today's episode of AT Daily. Your support to our nonprofit enables us to share more Torah with more people. Maria, may you and all your loved ones be showered in blessings, and we say Amen. We are in the month of Elul, the last month of the Hebrew year. It's a tradition to blow the shofar every day of this month. It is a wake-up call, and it is also a reminder. I'm going to make a little video maybe tomorrow or the next day. There's a story that says there was a king who was out visiting the kingdom, and he actually got detached from his retinue, his servants and guards, etc., and he got lost in the woods. And the further he went into the woods, the more lost he became, the more at sea he was, as it were. And then the people around him didn't even speak the language of his kingdom. But he found this woodsman who did speak his language, who said, "Let me help you, let me take care of you. Here, have some water, have something to eat." And this woodsman was playing a flute. He played a happy tune on his flute. Well, the king was so grateful to be taken care of, to find this degree of care, so far from his palace and all the attendants that he was used to. He wanted to reward this man. He said, "Come back with me. I'm actually the king." Brought him to the palace, dressed him in fine garments, gave him a position of great authority, and he was friends with and served the king faithfully for many, many years. After a long time had passed, the guy did something that this minister now, high-level minister in the kingdom, did something that angered the king, and the king was going to have him sentenced to a stiff penalty, prison or something. But at the trial, what did the woodsman do? He dressed in his old clothes the way he used to wear back in the days that he was just living in the woods, and he played that simple tune on his flute, and it reminded the king of how the woodsman had been there for the king when the king really needed him. And then the king forgave whatever the affront was at that later day. So too, when we sin and we transgress and we do all kinds of things, and then we come before the heavenly throne for judgment on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we blow that shofar to remind the king of that time way, way back when the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. We have a midrash, a tradition that says before God gave the Jewish people the Torah at Mount Sinai, he offered the Torah to every other nation. And the nations would say, well, what's in it? And when they heard, oh, you can't kill, you can't take, you can't steal, you can't lie, you can't do all these things, they said, it's better to live without that Torah. When the Jews were offered the Torah, they didn't say what's in it. They said, before they even heard what was in it, we will do, and then we will listen to it, right? Na'aseh v'nishma. They were ready to just swear loyalty to the king. And that was a beautiful and intimate relationship that we had with God at that moment when he brought us out of Egypt and took care of all our needs, and we just trusted in him. And we like to we like to remember for ourselves and remind God, as it were, what a close relationship we had at Mount Sinai. And so we blow the shofar. Let us do some learning. Where are we holding? This is page 41 here in Tractate Sukkah. This is the 7th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Sukkot. This book has 5 chapters. We're nearing the end of chapter 3. Chapter 1 was all about the requirements of the sukkah itself. Chapter 2 was about how we fulfill the obligation of residing in the sukkah during the days of Sukkot. Chapter 3 is all about the lulav and the esrog, the 4 species that we take together: the branch of the date palm, of the willow tree, of the myrtle tree, and the fruit, the citron, called the esrog. We take those 4 together. We say a blessing when we take them together because it's a Torah commandment to do that, at least on the first day of the festival. And we're talking about how we fulfill that obligation. Today we're reading the 11th and 12th Mishna of chapter 3. So let's get into it. Mishnah 11. Originally, during the temple era, the lulav was taken in the temple for 7 days, and in the rest of the country outside the temple, it was taken for 1 day, meaning the first day of the festival. Once the temple was destroyed, meaning when the second temple was destroyed, and we have not recovered from that. So once the temple was destroyed, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai instituted an ordinance that the lulav should be taken even in the rest of the country for 7 days in commemoration of the Holy Temple. We've talked about Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai before, but here is a kind of lovely little summary of who he was from Rav Steinsaltz, who edited the Koran Talmud. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai headed the Sanhedrin, the sort of council of leadership of the Jewish people in the ancient times. He headed the Sanhedrin after the destruction of the Second Temple. He was one of the greatest leaders in the history of the Jewish people. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was the youngest of Hillel the Elder's students, right? So when we talk about Beis Hillel, the followers of Hillel, so he was one of the youngest of Hillel's students directly. He was a student of Hillel the Elder. He lived to an old age, and he served as the leader of the Jewish people for many years. The sages said of him that there was not a single area of Torah that he neglected. Despite his prominence, he was a modest individual who greeted every person he met, including non-Jews, in the marketplace, meaning on the street and public. Wherever he went, he greeted everybody. Even while the temple stood, he was acknowledged as a leading Torah scholar. And most of the sages of that generation were his students. When the Great Revolt erupted, Rabban Yochanan adopted a position strongly opposed to it, meaning the Great Revolt that led to the destruction of the temple and the sacking of Jerusalem by the Romans. Rabban Yochanan adopted a position strongly opposed to that revolt because he could see that this would be the result. And he sought rather to resolve the situation peacefully so that the temple would last longer. he was not listened to. As one of the leaders of besieged Jerusalem, he was aware that the city would soon fall, and he succeeded in escaping with the help of several of his students in order to appear before the Roman general Vespasian. He actually, they said he was dead, and they carried his coffin outside of the city, and that's how he got the interview with Vespasian, who received him warmly. When his prediction that General Vespasian would be appointed emperor of Rome was fulfilled, Vespasian rewarded him by allowing him to establish a new center of Jewish Torah study and leadership in the small town of Yavne. Rabban Yochanan took this opportunity to save the life of Rabban Gamliel as well. In Yavne, Rabban Yochanan succeeded in instituting a wide range of ordinances that offered hope for Jewish continuity in the absence of the temple, even as they served to commemorate the temple and promised the possibility of its ultimate rebuilding. The results of his efforts are integral to the modern practice of Judaism. His students taught Torah throughout the land of Israel following the destruction of the temple, and he served as a mentor for Rabban Gamliel of Yavne, who succeeded him in the leadership capacity as the Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin. So that's who we're talking about, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. And what we're saying is, when the temple was standing, the taking of the lulav was only done throughout the land of Israel on the first day of Sukkot, the actual festival day, whereas in the Holy Temple, it was done every day of the festival. After the temple was destroyed, Rabban Yochanan instituted that all the people would take the lulav and esrog every day of the festival in commemoration of the temple. And for similar reasons, he instituted an ordinance that for the entire day of waving the Omer offering, it should be prohibited to eat the grain of the new crop. When do we wave the Omer? That's on the second day of Passover. It is prohibited to eat the grain of the new crop, meaning that year, right? Passover is a spring holiday. It's kind of later in the spring, so there is new crop. There's new wheat that has grown in the spring, but we're not allowed to eat it until that Omer offering is brought in the temple. And so the offering was sacrificed in the morning when the temple stood. However, after taking potential delays into consideration, the new crop remained prohibited until it was clear that the offering had been sacrificed. Practically speaking, it was prohibited to eat the new grain until the 16th of Nisan, meaning the second day of Passover, had ended. It was permitted only on the third day of Passover, the 17th of the Nisan. Once the temple was destroyed and there was no longer an Omer offering to be brought, it was permitted to eat the new crop on the 16th. You didn't have to wait until the 17th. However, Rabban Yochanan instituted an ordinance that eating the new grain would remain prohibited until the 17th, just as had been done when the temple was standing. Now there was no offering that was brought, so we could eat it on the 16th, but instead everyone would wait until the 17th as a remembrance of the Holy Temple. That is Mishnah number 11. We're just going to read one paragraph of the Gemara on that Mishnah, the commentary. And the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that we institute ordinances in commemoration of the temple? And Rabbi Yochanan said that it is, as the verse states, Jeremiah 30:17, for I will restore health unto you, and I will heal you of your wounds, says the Lord, because they have called you an outcast. She is Zion, there is none that seeks her. From the fact that the verse states there is none that seeks her, it can be learned by inference that she requires seeking, i.e., people should think of and remember the temple. And that is the reason for Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's ordinance. Now we go down on the B side of page 41 to Mishnah number 12 here in chapter 3. If the first day of the festival of Sukkot occurs on Shabbos, all of the people bring their lulavim, right? The lulav itself is the palm of the date plant, the branch of the date palm. But when we say the lulav, we're also just referring to the 4 species, the 3 branches bound together, and the esrog that we carry with it. All of the people. So when the first day of Sukkot occurs on Shabbos, all of the people bring their lulavim to the synagogue on Erev Shabbos, meaning Friday afternoon before Shabbat has begun, as it is prohibited to carry in a public domain on Shabbos. The next day, meaning Shabbos, everyone rises early and comes to the synagogue. Each and everyone recognizes his particular lulav and he takes it. And this emphasis that each and every person recognizes his own lulav and takes it is because the sages said a person does not fulfill his obligation to take the lulav on the first day of the festival with the lulav of another person. And on the rest of the days of the festival, a person does fulfill his obligation even if he uses the lulav of another person. Rabbi Yosef says if the first day of the festival occurs on Shabbos and he forgot and he carried the lulav out into the public domain, he is exempt from liability to bring a sin offering for carrying on Shabbos for this unwitting transgression because he carried it out with permission. In other words, he was preoccupied with the performance of a mitzvah when he carried it out into the public domain. That's not a heter, that's not a permit to carry on Shabbos, even to carry the lulav on Shabbos. We don't carry the lulav on Shabbos. It's just in case you forgot. You wouldn't become liable to bring a sin offering. That is Mishnah number 12. Now we embark on the commentary, the Gemara on that Mishnah. From where are these matters derived? That one does not fulfill his obligation with the lulav of another person on the first day of the festival. It is, as the sages taught, that it is written, Leviticus 23:40, and you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of a beautiful tree, branches of a date palm, and boughs of a dense-leaved tree, and willows of the brook. Those are the 4 species. And the use of the second person plural in the phrase, and you shall take, indicates that there should be taking in the hand of each and every individual. And the word yourselves in the phrase take for yourselves means from your own property. And this is to exclude a borrowed or a stolen lulav. And from here the sages stated, a person does not fulfill his obligation on the first day of the festival with the lulav of another person unless that other person gave it to him as a full-fledged gift. As in that case, it belongs to him, and so he can fulfill his obligation with it. There was an incident involving Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Akiva, who were all traveling on a ship during the festival of Sukkot. And only Rabban Gamliel had a lulav which he had bought for 1,000 zuz. That's an extraordinary amount of money. And Rabban Gamliel took it and fulfilled his obligation with it, and then he gave it to Rabbi Yehoshua as a gift. Rabbi Yehoshua took it and fulfilled his obligation with it, and then he gave it to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah as a gift. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah took it and fulfilled his obligation with it, and he gave it to Rabbi Akiva as a gift. Rabbi Akiva took it, fulfilled his obligation with it, and he returned it to Rabban Gamliel. And the Gemara asks, why do I need to say that Rabbi Akiva returned the lulav to Rabban Gamliel? The crux of the story is that each of the sages fulfilled his obligation with the same lulav, and they were able to do that because each one received it as a gift. So at the time that he was holding it, it was his possession. And the Gemara answers, by including the detail that Rabbi Akiva gave it back to its original owner, Rabban Gamliel, the Tana teaches us another matter in passing, namely that a gift given on the condition that it be returned is considered a full-fledged gift, Even if the owner stipulates from the outset that the gift would be returned, since he gives it as a gift in the interim, its legal status is that of a full-fledged gift. So even though you could say, well, I'm going to give this to you as a gift on condition that after you fulfill your obligation with it, you gift it back to me in return, that still counts as a full-fledged gift because in the interim, it's totally his, it's his possession. This is like that which Rava said, that in the case of one who says to another, here is an esrog for you on condition that you return it to me, and the recipient took it and fulfilled his obligation with it. If he returned the esrog, then he fulfilled his obligation of taking the esrog during Sukkot. However, if he did not return the gift, he did not fulfill his obligation. Why? Let's think about that for a second. So you have to own the four species, the esrog and the lulav, etc., in order to fulfill your obligation with it on the first day of the festival. If I say, okay, I bought it, I own it, I'm going to give it to you as a gift on condition that when you're done with it, you return it to me, you gift it back to me. So I gift it to you. Now you fulfill your obligation, you lift it up and you say the blessing over it, and then you don't give it back to me. So what happens? Since I gave it to you on condition that after you're done with it, you gift it back to me, and you didn't gift it back to me, well then you never received the gift because you did not fulfill the condition under which I gave it to you. So while you were holding it, since you didn't later fulfill that condition of gifting it back, retroactively it's determined that you never had ownership of it. And so when you took it and said a blessing over it, that was actually saying a blessing in vain, and you didn't fulfill your obligation because you weren't the owner, because you didn't fulfill the condition under which I gave it to you. It takes a little moment to understand that, but it makes sense. And this is like, wait, I said that? And the Gemara asks, why do I need to say that Rabban Gamliel bought his lulav for 1,000 zuz? Why was that detail of the story included in the story when it seems that we're teaching about fulfilling your obligation by receiving somebody else's lulav as a gift? What difference does it make how much it originally cost? And the Gemara answers, this detail was included in the story to inform you how beloved the mitzvahs, how beloved the commandments were to these sages, to the extent that Rabban Gamliel was willing to pay an exorbitant sum to purchase a lulav. And even today, some people, who can afford it, and sometimes they can't even afford it so much, will go out of their way to find the most beautiful esrog that they can, the most, the date palm branch, the willow branch, the myrtle branch. Those are always going to be a kind of like sort of, standard level of beauty. But it's the esrog, that citron fruit, which can really be distinguished from the most beautiful to just average. And people, kind of a standard set of these four things, but really determined by the value of the citron, usually pay $50-$60 for the set. But some people will spend $200, $300, $400, $500, even $1,000, not unheard of. I think even $2,000, not unheard of, for an absolutely beautiful specimen of that citron fruit. Most people do not do that, but for some people, that particular mitzvah, that particular commandment is very dear to them, and they will try to execute it to the best of their ability and to the extent that they can afford it. It is recommended, we've read that elsewhere, I think in Tractate Brachos, the first tractate of the Talmud, that as a Jew, you should have one commandment that is especially dear to you, usually it kind of comes upon you. You don't have to just pick one. Eventually you realize that there is a commandment that is especially meaningful to you. It doesn't mean you have to spend a lot of money to fulfill that obligation, but it means that you want to learn a little bit more about that commandment, be a little bit more diligent in fulfilling it, try to make it as beautiful as you can when you fulfill that obligation. We continue. Mar bar Amemar said to Rav Ashi, my father would pray with the four species in his hand in an expression of his love for the mitzvah. And the Gemara raises an objection. A person should not hold tefillin in his hand or a Torah scroll in his lap and pray while doing so. Neither should he urinate with them in his hand, nor should he sleep with them in his hand, neither a deep sleep nor a brief nap. Right, so we're kind of mixing ideas here. But one thing is when you're wearing your tefillin or even holding your tefillin in your hand, as opposed to when you're wearing your tefillin or even holding it in your hand, you should not enter a bathroom. You don't bring your tefillin with you in the bathroom. But the first idea that was introduced here is that Bar Ameimar's father would hold the lulav and esrog in his hand while he was praying, meaning during the holiday of Sukkot. The Gemara says, well, we have a teaching that you shouldn't hold your tefillin in your hand as opposed to when you're wearing it, like when it's wrapped up and about to be packed away. You shouldn't hold it in your hand, nor should you hold a Torah scroll in your hand or any other sacred book while you are praying. Why? We're going to explain in a moment. And Shmuel said, the sage Shmuel said, with regard to a knife, a bowl of food, a loaf of bread, or money, these items are similar to those that were mentioned above, and he shouldn't be holding them while he is praying. Why? Since he is concerned that these items could fall from his hand, he could drop them, and therefore he's going to be distracted and be unable to concentrate properly on his prayers. Why then is that not the case with regard to the lulav? And it should be prohibited to hold the lulav also during prayer for the same reason. And the Gemara answers, there in the cases listed above, those items that he's holding in his hand are not related to the performance of a mitzvah, right? With your tefillin, when you're wearing it, you're performing a mitzvah. When you're just holding the tefillin in your hand like you're transporting it, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah. And certainly you're not performing a mitzvah when you're holding a knife or a loaf of bread in your hand. But here, in the case of the lulav and esrog, they are related to the performance of a mitzvah during Sukkot, that you're taking the lulav and esrog, you're holding it in your hand. And so therefore, you're not preoccupied with them. You're just fulfilling the mitzvah, and you're also praying. In both cases, you're ascribing glory to God. You're thanking God. You're praying to God. You're giving honor to God by praying or by holding the lulav and esrog. And the Gemara cites support for the custom mentioned above, as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok says, this was the custom of the people of Jerusalem during the festival of Sukkot. A person left his house and his lulav was in his hand, and he goes to the synagogue and his lulav is in his hand, and he recites the Shema and he prays, and the lulav is in his hand. He reads the Torah, and the priest lifts his hands to recite the priestly benediction, and he places it on the ground because he cannot perform those tasks while holding the lulav. The priest can't lift his hands to bless the people while holding the lulav, so he would put it down for that. But otherwise, they would carry the lulav around all day in ancient Jerusalem. If he goes to visit a person who is ill or to console mourners in a shiva house, and his lulav is in his hand, then he enters the study hall and the lulav is in his hand. Or he enters the study hall to study Torah. In that case, he sends his lulav home in the hands of his son, in the hands of his slave, or in the hands of his agent, so that he won't be distracted with it while he's studying Torah. And the Gemara asks, I think maybe right, so when you visit the sick or when you go to a shiva house, even in ancient Jerusalem, they would not hold the lulav. They would send it home because it would be inappropriate to bring a symbol of great joy into a house of mourning. Although we don't sit shiva during Sukkot, but that's another matter. Where am I? So he goes to visit the ill or to console mourners, and his lulav is in his hand. He enters the study hall to study Torah, and he sends his lulav home. And so the Gemara asked, what is the Baraisa teaching us by relating all these details that appear to establish the same practice? And the Gemara explains, it is to inform you how vigilant they were in the performance of mitzvahs and how much they cherished them, that they would carry them around all day. Now, with regard to this idea that you don't hold something while you are praying, and I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in now. It is prohibited, this is the law, as Rav Steinsaltz explains, it is prohibited for one who is praying to hold his tefillin or any sacred book in his hand, nor may he hold a full bowl a knife, money, or a loaf of bread. Since he will be making certain that these items do not fall out of respect to them. I mean, the tefillin and the Torah scroll, they're very holy, but you're going to be making sure that they don't fall on the ground, and now you're distracted from your prayer. If he holds them and recites the prayers, then he must recite his prayers again. However, it is permitted to hold a lulav in one's hand while praying. Since he is fulfilling a commandment in holding the lulav, it does not distract him from his prayers. For the same reason, one may hold a prayer book. You can certainly hold a prayer book while you're praying because it helps you pray. Even in the case of items to which one would be indifferent, were they to fall while praying, he should not hold them in his hand ab initio. However, if he did hold them in his hand while praying, he fulfilled his obligation after the fact. But anything that you're concerned about dropping, you shouldn't be holding in your hand while praying, and it will actually disqualify your prayers. Now, I titled today's show, The Problem with a Prayer Phone. And by that, I mean that there are prayer book apps on smartphones, right? So now we have a little bit of a problem. If you're holding that app open, okay, so now it's acting as your prayer book. Now you could hold it in your hand. But you should make darn sure that that phone is set to do not disturb if you're going to be using it as your prayer book by having a prayer book app open on the phone. I made that mistake last night. I mean, just last night. I normally go to this minyan and like they didn't have the prayer book available that I like to use. So I said, all right, so I'll just use the app on my phone. And I forgot to put the do not disturb on. And sure enough, in the middle of prayer, like a notification came up that was very distracting. And I was like, this is so, I messed up. This is definitely wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And now today, the next day, right? In fact, the same day, since that happened last night by Mariv, so it's the same day today, here's this law that I read that you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't have anything in your hand that could distract you. Even if it's something holy, beautiful and holy and spiritual and Jewish, that shouldn't be in your hand either because you're going to be concerned about dropping it. I think a lot of us, certainly I, could do a lot better in cultivating proper concentration and focus during prayer. So often we're kind of in a rush. We want to fulfill our obligation. There's other things I got to do. Just want to get through it. Just reading it fast. Did we really concentrate the way that we should? It takes attention. It takes desire to cultivate that proper focus. It takes practice. And even then, we're going to mess up sometimes. But it is a worthy aspiration to increase our focus and attention and concentration during prayer. A very worthy endeavor. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. And by the way, we don't now carry the lulav and esrog all over the place during Sukkot. If it's not Shabbos, we carry it to the synagogue and home from the synagogue in the mornings. And when we're reciting Hallel, we certainly carry it in and out of the Sukkah, but we don't carry it everywhere we go. That would be considered presumptuous, unless you are truly a very special, elevated, prominently holy person who's known to be meticulous with mitzvahs. Then it might not be seen presumptuous to carry it everywhere you go, but that is not the normal practice as it was in ancient Jerusalem. Okay. Let me see. We've got some company outside, so I'm not sure if Nina was able to slip me some questions. Right. So, Tom, you must have asked that before. I tell you, we don't take the lulav on Shabbos. Exactly. We don't take the lulav on Shabbos. That's why they would carry it to the synagogue before Shabbos. Now, I don't even think we do that. Right? So it's not that you would carry it to synagogue to use it on Shabbos. Now the practice has become, and I'm sure we'll encounter this tomorrow's page, we don't perform the bracha, we don't lift the lulav and say a blessing over it on Shabbos at all. Sharon, they have spoken of the waving and using during Hallel. When did the Hoshana Hakafos with the lulav begin? on Hoshana Rabbah, and also on Sukkot, this like walking around the room, singing Hoshanas and like making this beautiful kind of circular procession if there's enough people in the building to make a big circle all around the sanctuary or the prayer room while singing certain songs. I don't know. We'll see. I can't remember from the last time I read all these pages whether this is mentioned in the tractate or not. So I don't know when that was instituted. Maybe it already existed in the ancient times. We just simply haven't come to it yet. And I haven't researched the question. Okay, Nina had to cut out after she passed that question to me. So let me just check if there's anything else. Christo says, I actually have a few Siddurim apps, a few prayer book apps on his iPhone and iPad, but I don't use them to daven from, but they're good for reading and reviewing something outside of prayer. Yeah, I mean, and sometimes, you're traveling, you're on the road, you don't have a prayer book available, you're going to use that prayer book app. It's okay, but make sure that the phone is strictly a prayer book during that time. Those notifications got to be off. And the reality is, we're still a little concerned about dropping the phone, but okay, we would be concerned about dropping a prayer book too. But the problem is with those phones, even when it's on Do Not Disturb, right? Like certain family members can break through the Do Not Disturb, other stuff can come up. So it is definitely less than ideal, but in exigent circumstances, better than nothing. One might say, when you pray every day, after a while it happens that you pretty much memorize the whole prayer service, or a lot of it, especially like afternoon and evening prayers with simple services. So would it be okay to not use a prayer book when you've got the whole thing memorized? Yes, it's okay. You can do it, but it is better to have the text in front of you. It is definitely better to have the text in front of you. Why? Because it aids in that concentration and focus so that we can really mean it when we are addressing the Holy One. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a terrific evening. All the best.